here, right now. Calling out to all area crew, we gon' make it all happen right here, right now. Calling out to all area crew, we gon' make it all happen right here, right now. Calling out to all area crew, we gon' make it all happen right here, right now.
All right, today's episode is Dylan Menges, and the reason I'm kind of doing a preamble before the intro that Ryan already did is because it's kind of an interesting episode. We had some technical issues on our end, and I will cop to that. It's 100% my fault. On our end, we were monitoring, and it sounded fine to us, but I'm going to play a sample of what it sounded like for Dylan. And the fact that he sat through it and didn't hang up on us and sat through listening to this for an hour is mind-boggling. You're a saint. Thank you. So essentially we had static through the whole thing, and we couldn't hear it, but he could. And when we bounced the track down and I started to edit it, I could hear it, and it's driving me insane. And I did the best thing I could as far as cleaning it up. I was able to kind of select the sound and isolate it and try and extract it. But anytime that we talk, you can hear it behind us. I couldn't extract it out of our vocals. But through the rest of anytime Dylan's talking, anytime there's like some dead air or silence, it's gone. So if you can bear with us, Dylan had some great talking points. It was an awesome interview. Thank you again for sitting through an hour of this static nonsense noise. So with that, here we go. Here's the episode. Enjoy.
Hey there, and welcome to the show. Today's guest is Dylan Menges. Dylan is an artist, illustrator, letterer, and owner of Menges Design, a Columbus, Ohio-based design shop. We were referred to Dylan by our mutual friend and mutual fan, Jason Frostholm, of the Creative South podcast, shout out to those guys, whom I had tapped for guest ideas. He told us that Dylan was a must-get, so we're thrilled that he was able to make some time to come on the show. He's a busy guy, so we best not keep him waiting. Allow me to introduce our guest, Dylan Menges. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you on. As I mentioned in the intro, I was talking to Jason, who has been a guest on this show, and actually his was the first show I ever did, and it actually started the inspiration for doing this show. And but he mentioned that you were like the go-to guest that was the dude to have on, so we were really excited to get you. Yeah, it's pretty high praise. So
Yeah. Thanks, Jason.
Yeah, right. So anyway, let's sort of start, I guess, at the beginning. If you can fill us in a little bit on your life. So in the beginning, as a wee Dylan, you always had an interest in art. You were encouraged by parents and others in your life to stick with it. So can you talk a little bit about growing up artistic and when you knew that was what you wanted to do?
Yeah, when I was a kid, as I mentioned to you guys in the intro stuff, my parents were pretty artistic, and my dad painted. My mom has incredibly beautiful handwriting, almost like an architectural handwriting, and
calligraphy or just
like the true architecture, landscape architecture kind of lettering. Right. That's a great way to describe it. Very geometric. So I noticed those things as a kid, and the true backstory or the first moment was, and I know this sounds weird, but I actually remember it. I walked up to my mom as a very small kid, and I said, "Mommy, I want to draw." And she drew 6 circles on a page, and I filled in those circles, and I still have that, of course, just for sentimental purposes, not because it's a great piece of art. We all know that. But anyway, I started drawing at a really young age. I think I was 3.5 or 4 years old when I started have a memory of starting to draw. And without boring everyone to death with the intimate details beyond or from then to now, the one thing that's been very consistent through my childhood and until now is this act of drawing, and in a lot of variety of ways, but in both drawing in real life, looking at things and drawing them as I see them, or drawing from that memory, or drawing from reference, or drawing lettering and typography. So that...
Yeah, I think I have a turkey out of my hand, and that's about my level of artistic ability. Ryan, on the other hand, he's been drawing for a long time.
Similarly, my mother has saved I have a helicopter that looks a lot like a parrot that I grew when I was about 3 or 4. And that's been sort of, was my beginning as well. So one thing you mentioned in the bio that I thought was kind of an interesting thing, and I wanted to talk about it just because I think that this is something people struggle with. So many people say, I want to be a fireman, I want to be a policeman when I grew up. But you mentioned that you wanted to be a designer when you grew up. How did you know at such a young age that was it? Like, was the passion just inside you, or what was it that drove you to think that that's what you wanted to do, even as a child?
I think the key thing for me was that I had people around me that saw some ability in what I was doing and gave me feedback. And
I think that's really important.
Yeah, it really is. And I feel pretty spoiled to say that, because what I do is a visual thing, obviously, right, in design. And how many people don't have some kind of visually outward ability? And I wonder how do they understand the equation of what they're supposed to do for the rest of their life? I don't know.
I think a lot of people still struggle with that. I mean, I'm 36 and I still don't know what I'm going to do with the rest of my life.
Yeah, dude. And I'm a and being a visual person and having that encouragement from childhood all the way through now in my career, Mike, I still struggle with how to define that and focus it and tune it, all that. And I have a very visual, and especially in our culture, visual stuff is so dominant. So I feel tremendously blessed and lucky to be in this place. But that to go back to the question, that was really the key thing, was having people say, simple feedback. Hey, you can draw, or whatever it was. And, that's that kind of stuff takes care of itself in terms of reinforcement and encouragement and having you, any person, take advantage of that and say, well, if you're saying that's true, I guess there must be some truth to it. So on you go.
Well, yeah, and I think that, that's a good point, is not just receiving the feedback sort of freely, but also seeking feedback from people. And, your experience is probably similar to mine. As I was drawing in school and things like that, beyond just my mom, who was a big champion of mine, my friends and people in the area, in the class or whatever, would start to recognize my ability to draw or whatever. That sort of fed that loop, it was kind of this positive input all the time. Of course, every now and then you get checked, and especially in the advertising business, you'll get all the good feedback from your friends and your mom, and then some client will take a dump on your work. But you kind of have to have that whole spectrum to really feel out, whether you're right or wrong when you're making decisions.
You mentioned something though that's really important, and that is that it reminds me of something we were talking about with some other folks earlier last week, and that is. This is a quote or a Bible verse or something, I forget, but it basically says something like, be careful when everybody loves you. And I've been stewing on that for some reason last week or so. I could tell you why. It's a whole different topic, but I don't want to derail us. But I think it's really important to consider that, meditate on that kind of thing, and understand the importance of it. I know some younger designers now that are so focused on getting the praise of everyone around them and bringing that huddle in, that I think, man, are you really, like you said, are you getting feedback? And meaning, are you getting feedback that may be critical of your work, and are you willing to listen to that? Again, a whole other topic, but boy, what an important one.
Yeah, really important. Well, and I think it's sort of the gift and the curse of social media, right? It's very easy to publish work and get review on it.
And get the likes, the thumbs up.
You can sort of, find a self-selecting group. If it's your friends and your family, they're going to be like, oh, hey, yeah, thumbs up, hearts. But if you are sort of, if it's an open forum or if it's a client piece or whatever, the feedback may not always be positive. And especially as a designer, not to go, full blast on designer-centric discussion. But the reality is, if you can't take feedback, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
You have to develop some, at least some semblance of a thick skin.
Well, and having a core group of people that are your mentors or people that you can show your work to and they'll give you honest feedback is key. It's like if all they're doing is patting your back saying, yep, good job, you're not going to learn anything, you're not going to get better.
Well, and I think to Dylan's point, it's a balance, right? You do need to have some of that good feedback, to sort of carry you into the business. I mean, if you're getting beat down, from your childhood on, you may try and find something else to do. So it is a balance. You do need to be checked so that you can understand the reality, but at the same time, it's good to get that positive.
So after high school, you went to college for a little while, then you dropped out and went to the Marine Corps. How do you feel that helped in your current situation? Did you think it was a positive, or do you think it was just I'm paying for my school with it kind of thing, or expound on that?
Oh, that's an interesting point. No, I'll clarify up front. I did not go into the military to make money or pay for school, and at the time when I went in, the Marine Corps actually had a worse deal than other branches. So I promise you, it wasn't about the money.
You did serve in Hawaii.
I
though.
did,
That doesn't sound
so quick backstory there is I went in open so I dropped out of Ohio State and dropped out before they kicked me out, which is very true. And I owed the Marine Corps some time because I was at Ohio State on a scholarship, NROTC scholarship. So it was a big failure in my life. And my parents were understandably very disappointed, but it was what it was. And, looking back all this time later, I'm glad things worked out the way they did. However, at the time I dropped out, walked away from a scholarship and went off to the Marine Corps on my own terms with a recruiter, which means I did a full 4-year tour. And, when I went in what they call open contract, which means you have no pre-assigned job or pre-assigned duty station, because some guys actually negotiate that kind of thing with a recruiter. And so it wasn't until I got through a couple stages of basic and then a beyond basic training in Parris Island. At that later stage is when I found out what my job would be and what my duty station would be. So I was standing in a downpour in Texas with a staff sergeant in front of me who didn't like me and didn't like anybody, I don't think.
Screaming at you.
And his job that night was to basically soak us in this rainstorm and then during that yell out our duty stations. And at that time I found out that I was going to be a 5811, which is a military policeman, which is basically means a grunt with a badge. And he said, "Menges, Camp Smith, Hawaii." And I thought, sweet, I'll stand here in the rain. This is fun. So yeah, I was able to serve in Hawaii, my full tour, about 3.5 years of it. And at the time, I wasn't married, but I got married to Janet, and she was able to join me out there. And we had a pretty awesome life. I worked 12-hour shifts for the Marine Corps, and then when I wasn't working, I was surfing or hanging out with Janet, or both. And it was pretty cool. Incredible blessing.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah, that doesn't sound bad. So to kind of go back to Mike's point, though, do you think that maybe some of the discipline from school, I don't know. So for me, a common thing I come back to is discipline, and the importance of being disciplined when it comes to work, or if you're trying to run a business, things like that. So were you already a pretty disciplined guy, or did you take away from the Marine Corps some added discipline that might be helping you now as you work through your career and now into opening your own shop?
I knew discipline from growing up because having a dad who was a career Army guy, Korea, Vietnam veteran, combat in both. Just we had a pretty strict household, so I knew discipline. But in terms of self-discipline, I'm going to be really transparent and tell you I've struggled with that all my life. So,
well, good. I'm glad to know it's not just me.
Yeah, dude. So when I went into the Marine Corps, it was obviously a lot of things happening there that were not positive. And part of that was I went in angry, disappointed in myself, hurt, because of what I'd hurt my parents. A lot of things. Again, a lot of things I was dealing with. So what I was looking for was, number one, to fulfill an obligation, but two, I really did want to serve in the military in some capacity. It's why I had signed up for the original deal at Ohio State. So what came out of that and through it was the same thing you said. It was a better understanding of discipline, some structure in my life, which I had blown off for a couple of years at Ohio State, and some redirection, refocus, all those kind of buzzword type things, but they were all true. And then, of course, to be doing that refocusing and doing something different in a place like Hawaii was a nice bonus. So it was a bit of obviously pleasure living in Hawaii, but it was also helped me understand that I didn't want to be a career military guy in the time that I served as an enlisted guy in the Marine Corps. I loved it, loved the guys I was with to a point, but when I was done with 4 years, it was time to go back to. I felt it was time to go back to college and finish that degree, and that's what I did.
So you went back to Ohio State?
No, I came back to Columbus and went to CCAD, Columbus College of Art and Design, which is obviously the big design school here in Columbus.
So you got a bachelor in visual communication. Mm-hmm. Is that different than a normal, say, art degree or advertising degree? What's different with a visual communication degree?
No, it's the same thing as a graphic design, advertising kind of a degree. It's just CCAD spin on it.
Okay.
So this is something I want to ask, and I know for a few different designers I've talked to, it's for some reason comes off like a little bit of a sensitive subject, but I want to just get your take on it. What do you think, sort of as a senior guy and somebody who's been working as a designer and in advertising for a long time, what's your take on the importance of a formal education versus, coming up through the ranks or your School of Hard Knocks style education?
Man, that's a great question. That's a whole podcast all by itself, isn't it?
It really is. And I mean, you obviously made school a priority. You started, you stopped, but you did go back and you did finish. And I guess what I'm trying to get at is, for people who don't go maybe a traditional route or what would be considered traditional, by going through, high school and college and then starting, as a grunt in an agency and moving up the ranks. Mm-hmm. What do you think about the idea of being self-taught versus an education? Or do you think, are there things that you learned from your education that made it valuable enough that you would sort of encourage people to go that route?
Let me try to unpack this as efficiently as possible.
Yeah, sorry, it is a big question.
No, it's a great question, and I think it's a question that's all the more relevant right now, and I want to make sure I capture that in my comments. But first of all, I love what I got from CCAD, and I understand the school's changed a bit over the years, but there was a foundation year when I was there that no matter what major you chose, the foundation was intentionally titled. You were there to learn how to sketch, do some modeling, so some three-dimensional stuff, some graphic design work. Computers were coming into play then. Yes, that's how old I am. But there was a really nice balance of stuff that got your hands in a lot of different things. And I'm so thankful for that, especially the foundation year. But all of my 4 years, because I ended up doing a full 4 years, that speaks to how badly I did at Ohio State. But anyway, so I did a full deal there. But I learned so much at CCAD, and I'm really thankful for it. Now, let me switch gears. If you look at my friend Jeremy Slagle at slagledesign.com, Jeremy doesn't have a college degree. And no one will argue this point. And if they are, they're idiots. I'll just say it. Jeremy is one of the most talented designers I've ever met, will ever meet. He's incredibly gifted in a wide range of skills. And Jeremy is a self-taught guy. He took a few college courses, but he never finished an official degree. And again, I would encourage anyone listening to this, go to Slagle Design and look at the depth and the breadth of Jeremy's work and understand, again, the context is he's self-taught. Now, Jeremy, and that's what, there's something important about Jeremy, though, that has to be understood before anybody hears this and says, wow, great, well, I can skip all that and I can just go teach myself and watch YouTube videos. There's a really critical thing about Jeremy that has to be true, I believe, of anybody who takes that route. And it's something you guys mentioned a few minutes ago. If you're going to go down that road, you've got to be willing to listen hard to the instruction that you get. You've got to be willing to hear feedback and seek feedback, seek the hard stuff, and then, of course, apply and work and work and work. That's the key. And that's something that Jeremy has done over the years. If he didn't know how to do a certain thing, he taught himself. If he didn't know how to do photography, he taught himself. And he's taught me how to be a better photographer since. I hope that makes some sense.
Yeah, well, I think that's a really good approach. Because basically, I think self-taught or whether you go traditional route, the moral is kind of the same, right? It's hard work. Yep. It's lots of reps. It's continually learning and education. And so I think that, whichever track you choose, the moral is the same. I know about a 50-50 mix of folks who've gone the traditional route and folks who haven't. And, I can't say that any one is any better than another. Everybody's gone their way. But I always think it's interesting to get people's take on that, because for the folks that are sort of self-made or did skip college, I just sort of was curious your perspective. It's sort of somebody that's been in the business for a while.
Yeah, I think the last thing, if I can add one more point, is the world's changed a lot since I graduated CCAD. And since Jeremy and I met and have worked with each other and between each other for 20 years, and that is what you guys already know is there's things out there like Skillshare. There's some super high quality instruction online, and if it's not high quality, people will call you on it. So I love that about the day that we live in terms of getting quality instruction at a different price point, a lot cheaper, obviously, than college. And I think there's a model out there that kind of blends all that stuff, that maybe even says, you don't necessarily need a college degree, but what does that blended model look like? I don't know, but I'll tell you, here's a little reveal. I'm working towards putting together some instructional videos because I love to teach. I love to help people learn stuff. I love learning stuff. And I'm starting to outline some videos that work toward that end, which is to say, maybe you don't need to go to design school. What if you could take a handful of courses that could really build a foundation for you over the course of whatever that time period is that you do on your own track?
Yeah, and I think I can sort of, I completely agree with that, and I think it's really important. I guess, one thing that the internet has sort of fostered is this interest in sharing and giving your take and putting it out there for the world to see. Yep. And I think that's a pretty cool thing about the internet. Like for me, for example, I went to school at a smaller university that didn't have a art-specific program. It just had like a marketing or a mass communications, is what it's called. And so, it was kind of advertising, but it had a lot of news writing and stuff in it that wasn't relevant to me. And so a lot of the skills that I picked up over the years were self-taught in a time, I'm not that much younger than you, and, so sort of in a time when it was hard to get that kind of information. I learned how to build websites because the only way to have a website was to build it back. Mm-hmm. And so I think that, the moral of the story is this idea of working hard and being able to go back and learn from others.
Well, when I went to school for audio engineering, and they actually signed us up for lynda.com in college, and some of our assignments were to just go on and listen, watch the video and come back and talk about it in class kind of thing. And after jumping into that and actually seeing what's actually available online, and that there are courses like that available for, $30 a month roughly.
Yeah.
I just kept a subscription going after I got out, and I've learned a little Photoshop, I've learned a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and anything I need, I just kind of jump on there and take a quick, refresher, and it's quite nice. I like that.
Yeah.
So after you graduated from CCAD, you went and worked in an agency for a few years, and how long were you in the agency? What were your takeaways from working in an agency versus being on your own now? And, did that, obviously, you learn more in the real world than you do in college, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. What were your takeaways from actual agency life versus being on your own?
Well, this is where I become the stinker for some people when I talk about this part of my career. But it's all good. I hope it's good. There's lessons to be learned from stuff, and I'll jump right into it. One of the biggest things I learned after doing agency life for about 18 years was scale is everything for me. That's what it meant for me. And let me unpack that as, again, try to be efficient here with the time. I actually learned from a former boss who told me directly that we make money on inefficiency. And I thought, wow, that's terrible. But I realized he was right. That was the nature of the agency I was in, and it was also the nature of other places I had worked. And please know, I don't believe in naming agencies or naming people when I have these conversations. I think I hate gossip. But the big takeaway for me was, again, at a certain scale of agency, and again, those numbers vary, but past a certain number of people, you are in a process that is just pretty inefficient, to put it nicely. And I understood over time what he meant by we make money on inefficiency. And so I don't bring that up to say, and that was the worst moment of my agency life. It's just, it was a realization and kind of a moment of truth. And it was one of many things that made me start to think about how I could do something differently, which ultimately led to opening Menges Design a few years ago, or 2015.
Yeah. Also, I guess sort of to that point about agency life, maybe on the positive front, were there any takeaways that you took from working in an agency that prepared you for starting your own company?
Yeah, so great question. And absolutely, and I'm so blessed to have spent my time in every single agency I was in, and I mean that. Even the times when I was standing at, with that guy and thinking, "Wow, he's right. We're making money off of inefficiency." I'm so deeply grateful for every one of my bosses, all of those coworkers, because I learned so much, good and bad, but so much good from those experiences. And to me, there's no way I could have started Menges Design until now, because I know it's an easy thing to say, well, I bet you wish you'd have done this several years ago. Not really. I wasn't ready for it. And I know a pretty junior designer that came to me last year, and he was working a gig that was not an agency. It was more of a private deal. And he said, I'd like to make a move. What should I do? And I said, dude, go find an agency job. And here's why. I said, you're not going to find the perfect job, number one. Number two, that agency job, whether it's large or small, is going to come with some dynamics that you will never find if you're solo or if you're working in a non-agency environment. And I said, those dynamics are going to shape you for the rest of your life and your career, and you're going to be so thankful that you did them. And I said, let me be clear. They're not going to be fun all the time. There's going to be pain points there. And the dynamics are things like dealing with difficult clients and long hours and work that you don't want to do and at levels that you don't want to do, and the confusion of career path and evaluations and all this stuff that comes with agencies. But I said it's all extremely valuable. So the ending of that story, at least the status of that story, is this dude went off and started his own deal, and he's a young guy. He's never worked in an agency. And what I'm watching now from a distance is kind of a train wreck, because he's
learning by the school of hard knocks.
Yeah. But in his mind, in his perception, he's surrounded himself by people. He's surrounded himself by people who are giving him all that praise, like we talked about earlier. And he's locked into a style that a lot of people like. It's that, Draplin thick line thing, and he's all locked into this. And he's in his own little bubble. And here's the problem, because I don't want to, again, make it sound like I'm just, trying to crush this kid's dreams. But when I look at that situation, I think two things. One, I will never be able to hire him. I can't hire him to help me with work, even though I wish I could. He's a nice guy. But I can't help him to hire me because I know exactly what I'm going to get in every single communication solution. It's going to be a rainbow bucket of colors and thick lines. I can't work with that, right? And then two, of course, a savvy client's going to see the same thing and realize, well, that may not be appropriate for me. So,
well, and I think that's good advice. It's funny because, like, in my career, I sort of reverse engineered it. I used to work in-house for a book publishing company. And at some point, I started freelancing at night and just doing design work in the evenings. And after a few years at the book publisher, they laid me off. And I sort of was thrust into work for myself. So I started just sort of professional freelancing, and it evolved into a company. And at the time, I was calling myself a creative agency. However, at the time, I had not set foot in an ad agency. And so for sort of the, for me, I was more artist than business person, and so that's why I sort of went that route. And then down the road, it became apparent to me, just as I got a little older and I started to recognize, that I needed to pick up some more skills. I started pinging ad agencies in the area. So I'm from Idaho originally, so I was hitting up the Salt Lake area and Boise, Idaho area. And they, and asking these agencies, hey, I'll donate a month of my time in exchange for the opportunity to come run the business. And, I reached out to a lot of different places, and not a lot of places bit. In fact, only one did. And, but they took me up on it, and they put me in a pool of designers and let me work with their team for a month, and that allowed me to sort of sit in on meetings and creative meetings and agency meetings and all these different things so I could just sort of start to learn the business of it. So after doing that, 2 years later, they asked me to come down and come to work for them. And then, it's a long story of layoffs and employments and all these different things. But I still work with this same agency today because of sort of that groundwork. Basically, I was able to show my character by offering my time. And they sort of showed me their character by being willing to give me that opportunity.
Yeah.
And so, so it's a little bit of a reverse engineering, but I think the moral is the same. It's, going to work for, in the industry that you want to be in and learning how to run a business if your ultimate goal is to go to work for yourself.
That's a cool story. I've never heard anybody do that before.
Yeah, well, and I don't think these guys had either.
They're like, what?
Yeah, no, I have, in the years since then, now I operate my company out of Salt Lake City. And so I've had opportunity to meet with a lot of these agencies who I hit up all those years ago. And, met with some of their people and stuff. And that's kind of the response is, wow, like that's pretty crazy to just ask to come sit in our meetings, all that stuff. But I mean, it worked out. And so I think it was a back way into the business, but it worked. So that works for me.
So you said in 2015 you opened your own design firm, Menges Designs. What were some of the major hurdles that you had to kind of overcome just starting your own business and learning curve involved with that?
Well, and maybe before you get into that, let me just ask you, and this is just precursor to that question, but what was the nudge that pushed you out of agency life and into doing your own? Everybody I know that's working in an agency wants to go out on their own at some point, but most of them are too afraid to actually take that step, or if you're the worst or whatever. But I wonder if you had a sort of a pinnacle moment that changed your trajectory and was like, okay, now it's the moment.
Okay, this is going to be the most unsexy answer, but I didn't have a big aha lightning bolt in the lap kind of moment. It was actually a series of things over the long haul that I had been pushing towards, little things that were kind of chipping away at me. And again, I hate to paint the picture like chipping away is not the right term. There is some of that. There's the frustration of seeing how things are done and thinking I can do that better. It's one of the oldest ways of hearing these kind of stories play out. But there was the other consistent thing on a very positive note, which was I was going in reverse of what I really enjoyed the most, and that was actually making the stuff, designing stuff. So I was on the classic trajectory from, well, not to spell it all out, but you guys know the drill, right? Going from an art design
designer, graphic designer, to art director, creative director, to
executive creative director. So right. Here I am making killer money, and yet I wasn't happy. I wasn't content.
Yeah, at some point, it becomes all business, and everyone else is doing all fun stuff.
Yeah. So Menges Design was not started out of frustration as the primary reason. It was started out of a motivation to make design again, to create stuff.
I like that.
So now, transitioning back to Mike's sort of original question, and some probably things you may have had to overcome. When you started business, at least was my experience as a freelancer and things like that, when I actually began like company and sort of rolled into business, I already had a little bit of a client base and things like that. But can you talk a little bit about hurdles you had to overcome in getting started, learning the way, and you may have been senior enough in an agency that you had a good understanding of business and taxes, payroll, all that kind of good stuff. But were there any, hiccups you hit along the way trying to get started before you really sort of hit your stride?
Well, the last thing you just mentioned was something that I was completely unaware of in terms of payroll and, this formal business structure, formal business knowledge. I've been freelancing off and on for years, but I had really no idea how to run a business. I didn't know what the difference between a S Corp and an LLC was, or how to set that up. I knew nothing really. So what I did do, and I mentioned in a couple talks, one last year here in Columbus at a design conference, I said I spent a year setting things up in advance, or at least I shouldn't say a year. Like I didn't have an actual timeline, like this is the exact time, but I started working towards that and doing the basics, setting up, looking into naming and setting up the business structure as an LLC or something else. And how do I do that? reading about taxes. But one of the key things that I did that was so helpful, and I highly recommend this, is because I'll never be able to encapsulate it in this podcast. I started Googling phrases like what I wish I knew 5 years ago. And I did that, of course, in a freelancer's context or, a small design studio context. But that kind of a phrase, what I learned in the last 5 years or what I wish I knew kind of stuff. Man, I'll tell you what, you talk about peeling your head back and getting a face full of information all at once. It was great because there's plenty of great posts out there where people are willing to say, man, if I had these 3 things lined up, I would have saved so much time and effort, etc.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good advice.
Yeah, so I compiled a lot of that and didn't rush into opening Menges Design. Instead, I ruminated on those things for months and, again, did some of these other administrative, clerical, business setup type things. All that stuff kind of happening before I actually launched the business, which I know sounds kind of straightforward, like, well, why wouldn't you do that? Well, the reality is, like that kid I mentioned earlier, a lot of people, I find out, don't do that.
Yeah, so, I was that kid.
Oh, yeah?
That was me. So I can relate.
Well, and Mike, before I make it sound like and because I did all these things, everything was great. That is not true either. I was smart enough to get an accountant from day one. And so I made some smart decisions, thankfully, because of other people in my life who were bold enough to say, hey, Dylan, here's an area where you suck and here's something you got to take care of, or on a little kinder note, saying, here's a couple things I would consider. So I like we've said throughout this podcast, I went out and sought advice and said, tell me what I don't know. And isn't it amazing when you ask people that or request that, they will tell you what you don't know. People love to share their knowledge. So simply asking and listening is amazing.
Yeah, and the other part of that, as you mentioned earlier too, is you've got to be able to hear that and ingest it and actually do something. Because so many people are so resistant to accepting feedback, or you'll ask somebody for advice, but they don't really want your advice. They just kind of say, yes. I don't know what it is. But anyway, I know that I found just being sort of a lifelong design guy and somebody who's very used to getting critique and giving critique, that I find myself getting in trouble sometimes when I give people sort of straight honesty. For example, we've been dealing with some problems at our kids' school. My youngest is getting himself in trouble and in the principal's office all the time. And I sent sort of a little email to the teachers the other day just saying, hey, this is what's wrong and this is how I think we could fix it. And it just caused this whole firestorm at the school. Like, oh my God, what are we supposed to do with all this? And for me, I just felt like I was being honest, and giving a straight critique. This is how you would fix that problem. But that wasn't what they were really looking for. What they really wanted was sort of a softer touch. So I find myself getting in trouble every now and then.
Well, you mentioned all those news writing courses that you didn't care for years ago.
Yeah. Now everybody else is paying for it. So, well, it's funny because my design program was actually run by I guess he would have been he was a lawyer, but he was sort of a law guy in the creative realm. And so for him, he had also come from a journalism background, and so he really pushed journalism. So we did a ton of writing, in what should have been kind of a design program. And so, I won't bag on the program too much, but I'm largely self-taught. So I guess everybody gets a different college experience, which is also part of why I asked that question earlier. I'm always curious. I like to find sort of similarities and differences in people's experience. And where you and I are sort of similar in age, I think it's really interesting to sort of, hear what you're saying, because you're sort of saying the same experiences that I have. And I guess it makes you feel more, comfortable with where you're at. So I wanted to ask you something. So, of course, one of the most difficult things, or hardest thing for me, because we've been considering a rebrand on our company, or maybe even starting a whole new thing, naming a company is really difficult. Obviously, it was easy for you using your name, but there's a little thing I wanted to ask you about in your logo. There's a little lightning bolt, and I heard there's a little backstory to that.
Yep, there's a quick backstory. I'll mention the naming thing really quickly because it was another little aha moment for me. I went through this exercise of all these clever names and trying to be clever and more cleverness and how clever can I be? And I realized, wait a second, Menges is a weird, obscure name even in Germany, its origin. And when you think about how Google likes oddballs, it's hard to differentiate if your name's Smith. No offense to the Smiths in the world, but
that's me, Mike Smith.
Yeah, Mike Smith. Sorry, Mike. But that's a tough. If you were to do MikeSmith.com, you might have a hard time, finding the cash to buy that one. Yeah, let alone to get the search engine to find the unique Mike Smith. But it's doable, but harder. So I realized Menges is so weird that why not use that name? So that was a nice little aha moment. Again, nice little blessing to have a strange last name. But it worked out pretty well, and stopped me from doing a lot of additional naming exercises. But back to the logo, there's really two things to share there. And one is that you mentioned the rebranding. Then as well as I do that even the mention of that, especially when you're saying rebranding yourself, makes you just want to don sackcloth and ashes and grind your teeth down to nubs because it's just painful.
It's true. This rebrand of mine has been going on for 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, he just won't stop talking about it.
Yeah, no, I in my soul, I want to do it, but I'm yet to actually pull the trigger. I can do it for a client all day, but for myself, it's a problem.
I laugh and I shouldn't. I mean, I know that pain. trying to put levity on the pain of that. So the logo is what I try to sell my clients and create for my clients is the simplest possible thing. But the story behind the logo is the fact that I got struck by lightning as a kid. And
wow.
It was a pretty normal day. I was hanging out with my 2 neighbor friends, these brothers, and we were in an open field. And it wasn't until actually just a few years ago I learned that lightning doesn't really care a lot about distance. And I didn't know this, but I didn't realize that lightning can actually arc sideways pretty significantly.
Uh-huh.
And so we were in this field that didn't indicate that there was a massive storm coming in, but it was definitely, some rumblings. So not a lot of warning. And the next thing I know, there was this tremendous boom. And the next thing, I woke up laying on the ground.
So I was close to getting struck in the Philippines. I walked out of my house and all the hair on my body stood up. It was the weirdest thing. I was just maybe 100 feet away from the house, and lightning struck, and it was about 100 yards away. But did your hair stand up on end?
I don't remember because it was so fast. It was literally the flash boom.
Okay.
And that was it.
Yeah.
That was it. So I woke up, and I remember, eyes opening and looking up at the older brother, and he was looking down at me like, what the heck? And I said, I think I'm going to go home now. And I remember he looked down and just kind of nodded at me like, yeah, that's a good idea. And the only weird thing beyond the strike, of course, or some indication of two things, was we don't know exactly what happened. And I'll tell you guys the weird reason why we don't know what happened exactly. But I bicycled home, and I could not stay awake the rest of the afternoon because this was kind of a midday thing. I was just exhausted. That was the only physical repercussion of the incident.
Didn't taste metal or anything.
Yeah, I couldn't taste metal. I got a heck of a twitch. You guys should see it. I'll show you sometime. No, it's terrible. But the next day I was fine. Supposedly. And the reason I don't know the intricate details, meaning, okay, if I had no physical burns, then did it really strike me, or did it strike at, the couple feet away from me? And the reason I don't know is because I was with those same 2 brothers about a handful of years later, and the 3 of us were in a freak Jeep accident that killed one of the brothers and left the other one just not the healthiest guy. And again, please know, the world's too small, and if the right people hear this, they'll know who those guys are. And I don't say that to say anything bad against them or their family, but we were in this freak accident, and I was thrown 100-some feet through the air, according to the sheriff's report. I landed in between the only opening big enough for a human body in what was a long ditch full of old concrete and rebar. And I crawled out of that and walked to a van, and with just a scratch on my back and a concussion.
Wow.
So freaky stuff.
Yeah, right.
And so obviously, like I said, the one brother died a few days later. of massive head trauma. And the other brother, I've never had a chance to speak to him and say, do you remember that incident in the field? What did you see? Because they were just a handful they were probably 20, 30 feet away from me when it happened.
Well, and so maybe, as a child, maybe you were too young to take much away from it, but as an adult, you look back on these things, and not to get too sort of spiritual or ethereal or whatever, but have they had any positive or negative effect on your life?
I could see someone getting really depressed about stuff like that and having a hard time getting over it.
Well, and at the same time, you might feel sort of
lucky and blessed.
Yeah, I think that's where my takeaway's been. I shouldn't say I think. I know that's where my takeaway's been. There's always that element of darkness about the story, especially the accident, of course. But between those two incidents alone, and other times in my life where I was clearly not supposed to be alive, I've cheated death several times, including just a few years ago. I wrecked a sports car, and that was the end of my love for cars. I was done. It was a horrible accident, and so in all those things, and that's where this lightning bolt logo comes from. I see it as a positive in that I believe there's a God, and I believe that he has interest in us, even though we a lot of times don't have interest in him, and by the way we think and act, and yet he's there and has this desire to have some kind of hangout time with us, to put it casually. And so the lightning bolt logo represents this idea that we are energy, and we are created energy, and we're meant to be creative energy outwardly, and of course it also makes a capital M, which is kind of convenient for anyone in business. There you go.
Cool. So let's transition back to the business. So by and large, do you consider yourself more of an illustrator or a letterer, and how did you sort of identify your niche?
I keep going, but I'll tell you, this is a whole other podcast, good and bad. Was just talking to Diane Gibbs on the Design and Recharge show about specializing versus generally being a generalist or a specialist. And I'm still struggling with that, because I think a lot of people see me, especially with Instagram, they see me as an illustrator, letterer guy. And yet when I started the business, I was doing this to create identity for people, identity design for businesses. That was it. And I might do some illustration and lettering. And like this Sweet Carrot job I just finished up, the client's name is Sweet Carrot here in Columbus. That was a full-blown illustration job done as a mural in 2 rooms in their new restaurant. And so I've picked up, and that's just one example, but I've got more of that work coming. And I keep getting requests to do the work that I keep showing on Instagram. It's funny how that works.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, so, yeah, it's really cool, as I peruse your website and things like that, the typographic work is very cool. Very illustrative, though, so maybe, it sort of falls into that category of illustrator. But, and obviously there's a lot of identity work and things on your website. But I think that, the typography is amazing, the lettering is amazing, and it's clear that you have an interest or a level of education in typography that maybe not every designer has.
Yeah, so to try to answer your question a little more succinctly, I think ultimately I am I like to think of myself as just a designer. I want to keep calling myself as a designer, and that's it. But I think in terms of asking the question in a different way and saying, what would you do 8 or 10 hours a day, even if you didn't get paid for it? I'd probably sit and draw letters and cartoons and some type of character illustration. So that's what I wrestle with is, yes, I'm a designer. I'm a formally trained designer. I spent my career doing interactive design and brand identity design and branding companies and all that. And now here with this studio of Menges Design, I find myself doing what I just described, what I would be doing 8 hours a day if nobody was paying me to do it.
Yeah.
Just so happens people are paying me to do it.
I would definitely encourage people to go check out the Design Recharge show that you're talking about. However, is it possible for you to give us just a little snapshot of what you think that, in 10 words or less, whether you think generalization or specialization is a better way to go? And maybe it varies by person.
Less, man.
I'm happy to give you as much form. I said I guess it depends by person, but, feel free to take as much time as you like, but I don't want to, take people away from going and just listening to her show as well. But I think that's a huge question for designers. We spoke with a guy, Ian Paget.
I was just going to bring that up because he focuses on logos.
Yeah, he runs LogoGeek.uk, and his specialty, he's also sort of a rounded designer, but logos are what he sells, and that's what he does. It's branding 100% of the time. And so in his case, he made a very strong argument for specializing. And so I was just curious, what your take was.
So my current take on it, because I swear this fluctuates month to month, it's why I struggle with it, is in the culture in which we live, I feel like specialization is where I'm leaning, because and this may sound like a crappy answer, so I apologize, but that's where my head's at lately, is our culture is so time-starved that no one will make the time to look at my site and say, wow, he does a lot of different things, and maybe some of these things will apply to me. Let me unpack that a little bit longer. What I would love to do is tell people I'm a designer, and design does different things for different communication needs. It redefines, like an identity design, or design illustrates. Okay, in the case of illustration, I could say design captures in the case of photography, which I also do, or design repurposes, which might talk about making sculpture out of recycled materials or something. Again, I keep going back to that. The design is the thing, and that will always be the umbrella. But yet, what I think maybe the truth of it is, I need to look at those categories and go photography, illustration, identity design, whatever else. What's that thing that you truly love to do, and is it a commercially marketable thing? And if so, focus on that and roll with it.
Yeah, I think that's good advice, and I think maybe it's another one of those blessings of the internet, is it's given people the opportunity to really specialize in what it is they're great at, and it's infinitely more simple to find a person that does exactly what it is you're looking for now than it may have been in sort of pre-internet time. And you did have to rely on, let's say, a larger agency for the breadth of skills, where now you can really dial in what it is you're looking for.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, the internet's amazing that way. I love it. Who doesn't?
Yeah, right.
So, one of the questions we asked you in our questionnaire that we sent over beforehand is what some of your favorite books are, and you replied with one of them was you have illustrated a copy of the Bible.
No, I haven't. Man, I wish I was part of that project.
I was going to say that's no small feat if you did.
Well, I'll tell you what. I want to make sure I give this an accurate link. Crossway's the publisher. I just, since you guys mentioned it again here, I'm going to make sure I tell people accurately what I'm looking at, because it's an amazing piece of work. And I also noticed the prices jump between $100 and $150, and then people are jacking this thing up to much, much higher prices. Anyway, it's called the Illuminated Bible Art Journaling Edition by Crossway. And a whole bunch of people got together to make this happen. And if you look it up on Amazon, it'll show up as ESV, which is English Standard Version, Illuminated Bible, Art Journaling Edition. But inside this thing are these really fantastic lettering jobs and illustrations, not just on the main book dividers, but all throughout this thing. And I'm one of these weirdos that likes to take little perfect tiny notes in my Bible, and my wife always comments, about my perfect little notes. But these guys have done these beautiful illustrations, like I said, and letter stuff all throughout that are, to me, just jaw-dropping. And I'm a pretty picky typographer. So that's really been an inspiration to me. Obviously, the book itself is inspirational to me, and I feel like I don't look at it enough. But then I open it up, and I see this really cool work, and I'm like, sweet, all the more reason to open it up and turn a page and find something new, because this thing is like riddled with really great work.
Yeah, another book that you brought up was Traction, Get a Grip on Your Business by Gino Wickman. And I actually went on Audible last night and downloaded it and listened to the first chapter, and I could see why you would enjoy that. It goes over 6 major components that people need to know in business. Starts with vision, people, data, issues, process, and traction. and I'm really looking forward to finishing it. So thank you for the reference.
So if you're into that kind of a book, the business type stuff, is there something you're reading? Because I know there's 1,000 books out there. It seems like every week that launch.
Oh, there's a lot of them. Todd Henry is a good author. He does a book called The Accidental Creative. He also just put another one out called Herding Tigers, and I haven't listened to that one yet, but it looks really promising. So Todd Henry's a great author.
So that's about about controlling a bunch of control freak egomaniacs like me?
It just talks about the creative process in general and working in the design-related field. And I think I'm a DJ. That's what I do for my income. And there's a lot of parallels that Ryan and I come across all the time just in the creative process and, you know.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's something that when this podcast began, it was originally sort of going to be a creative podcast, and the idea was to, really talk a lot to designers and art directors and, agency types and things like that, and really focus on the creativity. And we've evolved to include sort of all types of creativity, from starting businesses, building brands, to whatever it is. And a big reason for that was that we discovered, me and Mike have known each other for a long time, but in doing this show, we started to discover the parallels in the type of what I believed creativity was to what I now believe creativity is, where even in his field of being club DJ and things like that, he, goes through a similar process in choosing music or remixing things or whatever that we would do in a logo design or a rebrand exercise. And so it was kind of an interesting insight for me, and it sort of helped evolve this show from something that was maybe a little more staunch to something that's a little more accepting of all people from all trades, because we all sort of are tapping into creativity. So it's been kind of an interesting thing to discover.
Well, that's why I was interested in doing the show, because what you just said, I thought, okay, this is different. I mean, I listened to AID and some other very design-focused podcasts, and talk about getting in a huddle. We are definitely in our own little huddle sometimes and talking the same thing over and over, which is cool because it helps us, unpack some stuff, reinforce it, whatever. But the way you guys are bringing a whole different set of genres together and then finding those parallels, I think that's very cool.
One of the episodes you might enjoy is one that with DJ Phase. I can't remember which episode number it was, but a lot of the stuff that we've talked about as far as like taking critique and listening to, like he was talking about a DJ who thinks he's just the best person, out there, but he's surrounding himself with other DJs who just think he's awesome, when really he's, he not open to learning, not open to this, and that's one thing I was thinking about that when you were talking about that. So
well, again, that just goes back to these parallels. So I want to ask you a couple of final things to sort of, close this thing out. They're kind of general, but I think that they're good for people, especially creative folks, but I think it's applicable to other industries too. I wanted to ask you first about mentoring and sort of the importance of finding a mentor. This is something I personally have struggled with. I've tried to chase down a few people who I thought would make fine mentors, who I found had no interest in mentoring. So I wondered if that was something that you mentioned in sort of our pre-interview, was the importance of mentoring and being mentored. And I wondered if you could maybe give some advice on, first of all, finding someone, what makes a mentor versus, somebody else that you just look up to, random stranger or whatever. What actually makes them into a mentor? How you find that person, and how you sort of foster a good mentoring relationship.
Well, I think the first thing I have to ask you, Ryan, is, are you showering?
Once or twice a week for sure. I mean, sometimes more.
Every now and then I have to remind him.
So, hygiene, that's a big plus in finding a mentor for sure.
Hygiene's a plus. I've done a couple things in terms of mentoring that are first focused on me, and then I can talk about what the outbound looks like. For me in running the business, I found two things are important. One is having what I call allies, which are, not to unpack this too deeply, but basically those people that could be friends, family, but one of the main criteria for those allies is that they're willing to speak directly to you, speak some truth to you, that maybe other people won't. People that you consider friends, but they really don't want to get into some of the uglier stuff, or they don't want to confront you about something or whatever. I love what our pastor says. He goes, when you're in a friendship or a relationship and you start to notice those things about that other person that you really start to dislike, that irritates
usually
you,
6 months in.
Right? Is it 6 months? Okay. He says at that moment, that's time to dig in deeper and stay with it, not walk away, because you're getting to that point in the relationship when you're getting to you're at that depth point, and that's a good thing. So that to me is I think a filter for saying, okay, so who are my allies, and who should I seek out, for a mentor relationship? Maybe just looking around and going, first, who are those people who are going to just tell me the truth, who aren't going to, bow to my ego or my charisma or whatever, or my charm and all that garbage, which that's all it is garbage. And it is, right? And then the other one is the other thing I looked for is just a flat out hired business coach, because that is, I hope, a very objective view, a very objective relationship. And so I did that. I found a business coach, and my business coach is not like me. We're opposites. We dress differently. He's just a different kind of a dude.
Is he in the design field, or is he just a bit? Okay.
No. He's actually, we met through working at an agency together several years ago, but we are night and day, personality, all this, and that's why it works. So he has a very stoic personality, and I love him for that, because the look on his face when I'm babbling on about things is just priceless, because it reminds me, just close your mouth now and let him speak to you. And when he does, I finally let him talk and shut my obnoxious self down for a second, it's remarkable the objective wisdom-laced things that he does. And the questions he asks me are fantastic, because they make me uncomfortable. And so going back to the original question, what do you look for in that relationship? I think somebody who's willing to ask you the uncomfortable questions, or the hard questions, is really critical. Again, to state what I think is the obvious, but it may not be, is if you're not willing to hear that kind of feedback, this doesn't mean you have to react to it right away in the conversation. In fact, you probably shouldn't, because there's emotion there, and that's not cool. That could be really dangerous. But if you've got to be willing to sit in that conversation and ask yourself, if I'm really going to be a better designer, butcher, baker, dressmaker, whatever it is, I probably need that kind of feedback, because it's just so, I don't know about you guys, but it's hard for me to self-filter a lot of the time.
Well, and I think, this has obviously become kind of a recurring theme this episode, but this idea of looking for feedback and being willing to accept it. And so you can find that in a business coach or in a mentor. And, obviously that, if you're willing to hear critique, respond to it appropriately, not every critique is right. And sometimes you need to take a stand and defend your opinion. But I think, ultimately you can learn or grow as a human just by taking in the ideas of others.
And I like how you sought someone out who wasn't in your industry, because someone with an outside perspective is going to give you a completely different point of view than someone who works with you every day and sees, and is kind of doing the same thing. So.
Yeah, and what he's also done, which I mentioned, but I do this on the outbound when I'm mentoring somebody else, which I try to do throughout the year consistently, a few different people at least, is obviously being a better listener. That's a whole podcast by itself, of course. There's books written about it, and there's some great information out there. But being a better listener, and then on top of that, we've got to be able to listen better in order to ask better questions of people that we're talking to, listening to. And my business coach has been so good in teaching me that lesson of listen well, and as you're listening, try to understand why that person's saying that thing in the first place, and then get some questions in there that help unpack that particular thing that sounds like it's the real key issue. Not necessarily the surface, the topical issue, but what's underneath that, and unpack that stuff. I think some of the best mentoring sessions that I've done with people or where I'm actually doing very little. Well, you should do this. In fact, I'm doing none of that, and I'm just asking more questions and asking more questions.
Great. Well, and then so the last thing I wanted to close on, and I think it's relevant because I think you might be attending Creative South this year as part of Von Glitch's thing, which I'm super excited for. But I wanted to talk to you just quickly about the importance of attending conferences and networking. It seems, sort of obvious. Anytime you're continuing education or you're making new friends in the business, it's probably not a bad thing. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about your experience in that, what you think the value of that is, especially now as a self-employed person. Do you invest resources into going to those kinds of things? And what part do you think they play in your career and, should play in anyone's career?
A couple things to share there. One is I approach conferences now, 3 years into having the business. I approach conferences in the same way that I approach my business. I'm looking for smaller scale engagements because I think those are more meaningful. In other words, you've got obviously less people and a little more potential for one-on-one engagement with people versus feeling like you're just swimming through a crowd. Adobe, for example, puts on fantastic conferences. I'm sure you guys have heard that and maybe been yourselves. They're wonderful. They're perfect hosts, but they're just massive in scale, and so they don't feel very personal. Creative South, on the other hand, is 1,000 or less people, which is pretty small for a conference these days, for a lot of conferences. And Mike Jones's leadership just works its way down very quickly in the most genuine way when he says, what is it? Come as friends, leave as family. I think it's his unofficial tagline. But once you go there, you realize it's true. That's the flavor of Creative South. So I'm hooked, and this is my, I think third year back. And this year I'll be involved with the workshop with Von Glitchka. I'm contributing a drawing to the workshop that he and Sean are going to trace over top for their part of the workshop. So
that'll be really cool. We're actually working our way to maybe coming out there. I met Jason a couple of years ago at Weapons of Mass Creation Fest in Cleveland, and that's sort of how we moved into this whole Creative South circle. And to your point, I haven't been to Creative South yet. I'm hoping to go this year, but it's it really is that small conference feel. The relationships that I pulled out of that event are the most valuable that I've pulled out of any conference I've attended. So
you went to Weapons last year?
It would have been 2 years ago, I guess. It was when Stefan Sagmeister was there. And I think you may have been there.
I was, and that's Stefan's beauty talk was just,
it was amazing.
Just floored.
Well, and actually, that's what brought me out in the first place. Was I'd come to see him. I had been watching, sort of internet spying on Weapons of Mass Creation for a few years to that point, and that sort of pushed it for me to go see Stefan speak. It seemed like a cool opportunity, so I made the trip out. But we made a lot of friends while we were out there, and really turned that event into something special for me. And obviously, the next evolution of that is to do the Creative South. And so the big plan is to go out there. It was looking like I was going to go, and then the agency I consult for was then maybe going to pay for it, and now they're maybe not. And so now I'm in this spot where I haven't got my tickets yet, but I know time's running out, so gotta hurry. And so Lord willing, we'll be out there, but so far it's not worked out.
Well, I hope to see you, Mike. Would you do something like Creative South, or it just feels like it's
I would love
zone?
to. Unfortunately, I booked a wedding that weekend, so I'm already. Yeah, I know.
The plan was we were going to bring the show on the road, but I think what we'll do, and we've talked to Jason and everything about this, is if we do actually make it out there, we talk about doing versions of our show with some different co-hosts who are attending there. A number of our friends from Weapons are going to be there, and some other people, and of course, hopefully we'll make a bunch of new friends and family. And so we're hoping to have some co-hosts on to do something pretty integral to the event.
Well, that's why you guys need to be there, because the event is small and there's like a gauntlet of podcasts going on as you enter the building, the theater, and you go back to the main auditorium. So that's what makes it intimate and fun, is like you're walking past all these conversations and they're looking at you, and it's just it's cool.
I would really love to go. It was a friend, and they broke down and cried. You got to be at our wedding. I'm like, all right, I'll be there. So
Oh, the old crying tactic again, huh? Okay.
All right. Well, hey, on that note, let's wrap this thing up. Once again, our guest is Dylan Menges. Menges Design. It's menges.design is the website. You can also find him on Instagram and Twitter at Menges Design, and then he has a separate photography account that is Menges Design _apps. So if you want to follow his photography and his design careers, follow both of those. And with that, do you have anything else for us, Dylan, or does that feel like we pretty much come to the end of this road?
I think we covered it, and I sure appreciate you guys having me on. It's been fun talking with you.
Oh yeah, not a problem. Likewise.
Love to have you.
Thank you for coming on.
Parting shots for us. You can find more about me, my company, R2 Media Group at r2mg.com, and
you can find more about me at djontic.com. That's ONTIC.
And everything about the show at xcast.com or at xshow on Instagram and Twitter. And with that, everybody have an awesome week. And Dylan, thanks again.
Thank you.